Shabbat Shalom. This is May 16th, 2020, and this is my Torah thoughts for Be'ar. That's Leviticus 25, 1 through 26, and then chapter 26. This is one of the shorter Torah sections. It's very important. I think that's why it is so short. But this deals with the Shemitah year and the what's in English we call the year of Jubilee. But anyway, I'm going to start reading. This is in Leviticus 25. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, for yourself, and for your male and female slaves, and for your hired workers and the sojourner who lives with you, and for your cattle, and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its yield shall be for your food." Now, a reminder that the Torah was written for us, but not to us. So we have a natural inclination to try to put it within our understanding. Now, this is written, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And the idea was that when they came into the land, now all this is dealing with the land in Israel. We do not have that land. The Israelites have the land. And the idea was that they planted in the fall, not in the spring like we do. Their seasons start in the fall. So, the first harvest being the barley harvest, which comes in around Passover. So the idea is that the land would be worked for 6 years, and there would be a Sabbath of the land. And in that 6th year, they could expect a 300-fold, harvest, so that they would be able to sustain themselves through the 7th year, which would be, no planting or harvesting. And then, that next year they wouldn't be able to. So they would have to have 3 years worth of harvest. Now, and the idea was that nobody worked the land, and you weren't, I didn't go into real deep here because seems like, well, okay, you're not supposed to eat what the land produces, but the land will produce for you what you need to eat. So, but the idea was that they were going to be provided for if they let the land rest. Now, I don't want to go off on any big rabbit trails, but this didn't happen very often in recorded history. There's some discussion on that, but the idea that the land wouldn't rest for a year. Now it's, there are some instances in Israel where some of the Jews are letting the land rest for a year, giving it a Sabbath. Now, moving on in verse 8, in the English it's called the year of Jubilee. Jubilee is a pretty lousy translation. It should be Yovel, because it's Yod Vav Bet Lamed, and it comes out to Yovel. And Yovel literally means the sound of the shofar. Now, the instrument itself is a shofar. Yovel also means the instrument, but Yovel is the sound that the instrument makes. That's what it is, and that's what was called the Jubilee, but the sound is the sound of freedom. The call is the sound of bondage being broken. The sound is everybody being redeemed. Let your mind, shoot to all the references that can entail. And the idea is the sound is this, setting the people free. I found it kind of ironic that in the Arabic translation of that, it means to reign strongly, and that it would also mean for a stream to fill another stream, to bring in an abundance. Of course, you were talking about people that lived in the desert, lived in very arid conditions. So a strong rain was unusual, and it was really pretty neat because it would make the desert bloom. It would also be pretty dangerous if they were caught in low ground. But the idea was that Yovel is freedom, and you can think of it as provision too, because in the year of Jubilee, starting in verse 8, you shall count 7 weeks of years, 70 times 7 years, so that in the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. So every 50 years, there was supposed to be a year off. And that was the year of Yovel. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you when you reach, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes from the undressed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may eat the produce of the field. Now, we can go into a lot of that, but this is something that the idea of the year of Jubilee, the year of Yovel, there's so much to unpack, but these are just, I want to keep this simple. The idea was that the land wasn't theirs. The land belonged to the Lord. And he allotted, each tribe portions of the land. And the tribe then, was, to each family, clan was allotted, and each person had their allotment. Now, if they were going to, sell the land, they didn't sell the land. What they did was sold the amount of anticipated harvest that would be able to be cultivated from that land in the years remaining until the Jubilee. So, if they were like 20 years into the Jubilee, well, they had 29 years worth of harvests that they could expect. That was what they were purchasing, was, the right of the harvest. Because in the 50th year, the lease was up. It would go back to the original clan, the original family, and everybody returned to it. All debts were forgiven. All slaves were freed. It was freedom. Bondage was broken. The idea is that, the Lord knows that we get ourselves into enough mess, but he anticipated that so that every 50 years, everything would start all over. Now, I'm reminded that years and years ago, I used to study a lot of Native American culture, and many of the Plains tribes would do something similar. They wouldn't do it as a tribe. They would do it as an individual. They would just give everything away. They would do gifting to everything, to everybody. And then they would just basically start their life over. The idea was that they would be cutting their bondage to things. Not a lot of us can do that. Some of us have had to do that in bygone years or whatever, where we had everything was taken back to zero. But the thing was, there was still a provision. You could eat from the land that was being provided. So, the Lord provided. Jehovah brought freedom and provision for his people. So, in verse 18, therefore you shall do my statutes and keep my rules and perform them, and then you will dwell in the land securely. The land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell in it securely. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, if we may not sow or gather in our crops, I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old crop until the 9th year, when the crops arrives. So, this provision. To me, this whole thing was that we were going to be set free. We were going to be redeemed. We were going to be provided for. We would live in peace and security and have provision if we follow the statutes. Now, in verse 23, it says, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. This is the idea that the land would be, go back to the original clans. Same thing in a walled city. If a man sells a dwelling in a house in a walled city, he may redeem it within a year of its sale. For a full year he shall have the right of redemption. If it is not redeemed within a full year, then the house in the walled city shall belong in perpetuity to the buyer throughout his generation. It shall not be released in Jubilee. Okay. I didn't catch that first time. So that's about the only thing that could be permanently removed from one clan and given to another. But the houses of the village that have no wall around them shall be classified with the fields of the land. So if you lived in a walled city, you could sell your house. But if it was in a village with no walls, then the house was like the fields. It went back to the original clan. Okay, and the rest of this chapter deals with kindness for poor brothers. Again, Jehovah had a welfare system. Remember, they weren't supposed to, harvest to the edge of the fields. Part of the tithe was supposed to be taken in and given, for those like the widows and the orphans and the foreigners, those that were unable to provide for themselves. And then they go through and redeeming. Okay, in chapter 26. Okay, let me get to 26 here. And this is blessings for obedience. You shall not make idols for yourselves or erect an image or a pillar. You shall not set up a figurehead in stone to your land or bow down to it. For I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. So the whole thing goes on again about obedience. Let's go back to the thing in John. It says, if you love me, you'll keep my word, commandments, obedience to the what he has directed us. That's how we show our love to him. And this whole thing is about obedience. So the Shemitah year was every 7th year. The Yovel year was every 50th year. The idea is release and redemption. The whole concept is that, our Father looks out for us. He wants us to be secure and safe and provisioned for. So, and we do that by obeying His statutes, His obedience to His guidance. And there again, this is for in the Lamb. But I, believe that the idea that the precedence is established that wherever we are, that if we're obeying Him, He's going to look out for us. Now, we may not always be comfortable. We may not always be thrilled with what's going on around us, like right now in the COVID stuff. But the idea is that He's looking out for us, and we can trust Him for that. So, if you have any feedback, you can either send me a comment on the text message or leave a comment at the bottom of the video here. The idea is that, I would hope that this would be some discussion. And, the idea is that we can still go back and forth and we can still learn from each other. So this wraps up my thoughts on the Torah portion for this week. Shalom.